All right, Commissioner Sabir, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So the first thing I'd like to ask you about before we get into voting and poverty, can you tell us a little bit about what the Board of Commissioners does?
Sure. The Philadelphia Commissioners are a three-member bipartisan board of elected officials, and we oversee the election functions in Philadelphia County. Each commissioner is independently elected with an election that coincides with the mayor and city council. There's two Democrats and one Republican on the board as now.
Right. And how did you become interested in doing this kind of work?
Long story, but I guess I could try to condense it. In 2013, I was elected for traffic court judge, and traffic court was abolished. I came in first place, and I was ready to give up on politics. I thought it was a system. There were so many first-time voters that voted for me. And Senator Vincent Hughes, I lived in his district at the time, and he felt sorry for me. He said, "Hey, young man," he said, "Well, I voted to get rid of your job, but come work for me." And I said, "Wow." I said, the irony of it all. And I talked to my mentor, State Representative Louise Williams Bishop, who she got me into politics. And she said Vincent Hughes was decent, doesn't lie. And she said that you can learn a lot from this man. And I said, fine, let's do it reluctantly. And I worked for him for 6 years. And when I was with him, I was doing so many different initiatives in regards with voting, making voting more accessible for everyone. And then Commissioner Clark resigned. It was an open seat. And the Democratic Party said, "Hey, we want you to be here, young man. Think you can serve us." And the rest was a wrap. I didn't think the job was going to be what it was, because before it was different. It was just basically like you're going around the schools, senior homes, telling people to get registered to vote. It was kind of like a plum job that everybody kind of wanted, but I guess they gave it to the right person, and it just transformed. I never thought my life would be threatened. I never thought I'd be on international news. I never thought that I would be overseeing a budget that's $35 million. I just never thought all these different things that has happened with the office, how it sort of revolutionized over the last 3 years. I never expected it all. So here I am, still in my freshman term, sitting right here in front of you.
Kind of a baptism by fire when you think about it, what you went through in that first term.
Very first election. So so it was very first election. It was a pandemic. It was civil unrest with the George Floyd. I mean, it was just so many things that was happening. The election had got pushed back to June. And then that was the first time we implemented vote by mail. It was an unfunded mandate from the state. So we actually had to fundraise to get the money to buy the equipment. And after we purchased the equipment, we actually had to find a place to put all the equipment at, which we ended up over at Pennsylvania Convention Center, which was a blessing because they didn't have any shows coming in. So that's where we used 100,000 square feet. It was perfect for the protest because it was about 40,000 or so people that was outside every day protesting during the election. So it was just something. I mean, as I reflect back after it all, I kind of like, wow, like it was a ride. But in the middle, I wasn't thinking about it. I just knew we just had to get that sort of, get the election done because that's what was required by the Philadelphia Charter and the election code. I was just thinking about getting those things done. And it ended up being successful. I mean, it was the most scrutinized election in the history of elections. So it sort of challenged us as a board, my colleagues and I, to do the best practices, to sometimes in government, you may see people doing things a certain way. They just doing it because it's the way how it's always been done. So we had to really challenge ourselves to really find out what was the reasons behind why we were doing it. Because the election deniers were looking for any sort of loophole, any sort of thing that you were doing improper to get to sow out on the election. And I'm pleased to say, I think it was 47 lawsuits, 47 to no. you know, so it's a great thing. And it was great for democracy because we saw the transparency in elections that we haven't seen before. It's one of those critical infrastructures that happen twice a year, some states 3 times a year, and people never really cared about it. Nobody cared about the election workers. Nobody even knew what we done. And to see all that sort of transparency, I guess that was all the silver lining in it. And we also saw increased voter turnouts in those elections.
So when you go through all those things, and now you're where you are now, does that change you as an elected official, like in how you view your job and how you handle your responsibilities?
Well, it changes you as a person. It changes your perspective. And not just here in Philadelphia, it's international. I mean, the people in Selma, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi, I mean, all these different places, Atlanta, Georgia, they call, we having conversations. I'm taking trips out there, meeting with President Biden, United States Senate, United States Congress about, what we do. So it changes you as a person, and it actually teaches you this sort of struggle. I mean, because I'm one of maybe 5 or so African American election officials. There's no diversity really in election officials across our country. So when I go to these conferences, just me there. But then when you look at the sort of trials and tribulations that African Americans went through to vote and still continue to go through, it's just like fascinating. And then when we learn these things in the history books like Medgar Evers, Octavius Cotto, we read those stories all the time as being a younger person, but to actually really see that it's still a thing, it's like, wow. So it changes
Are
you,
you
as a person.
are you? Did you just say that you're one of 5 African American election officials throughout the entire country?
Maybe 5. I mean, that handles a large budget. So, we're like, when you take factor in the top 10 cities, it may only
Okay.
be,
Well, still, that's very unreasonable. that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I mean, even if you look at the Philadelphia, even if you look at our board, I'm the only African American on the board of a city that's the majority African American, Latino, and Asian. So it's still kind of like, still diversity. I mean, it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's. I'm very surprised and not thrilled to hear that across the country. So, what goes into actually prepping for an election?
The question is, what doesn't? I mean, you have to organize poll workers, and you have to find the polling locations, right, to administer an election. So in Philadelphia, we have over 1,700 divisions and a little over 800 polling locations. Now, the number went down a little pandemic. It was more than that. A lot of landlords don't want us to have our polling locations there anymore. So that's one of the things we are trying to work out to get more locations. But, it's still a good number because again, across our country, people, they kind of gave up on this polling locations thing. But yeah, it's like, so you got to galvanize 8,500 people to want to be at a specific place by 7 a.m. They got to get training. They got to close. So that's the hardest part. And of course, you got to find 800 locations, which most of them from the Philadelphia School District, libraries, they give us most of our locations, but you still got to find other locations closer to people. Then we have to oversee about approximately 140 or so full-time employees. You have to coordinate between the different departments to make sure everything is running smoothly. And then now, which is another added component to our election, is the getting material for the vote by mail. You have to purchase paper, you got to purchase ink, you got to coordinate with vendors, you got to do all these different things because even in a pandemic where you have supply chain issues, where you have to still produce the paper, you still got to pay for postage, you still have to do all these different things, so software, all kind of stuff you got to do, negotiate with consultants. I mean, you got to do all these different sort of things, and it's a hard deadline. So you can't push it back. So in the midst of the pandemic, people calling out, people, you still got this hard date you have to get done. So those are pretty much a lot of the larger challenges. And then you got different laws as well. So the legislator has been changing laws as well. So we can maybe plan and do something a certain way, then the law just get changed. And we just gotta openly do something completely, totally different than the way we've been doing it.
And it's a year-long process. It's not just something that happens a couple months before the election. This is
Well,
all
so
the
it's right. So you will look at so it's election every 6 months. A lot of times we don't look at, elections. We look at it sometimes as one time. But no, it's an occurrence that happens every 6 months, twice a year. So yeah, so 365 days, we're always planning. Again, if we're not, staffing people with mind paper, we're trying to figure it all out. And I keep saying paper and over again because that's the mail-in ballot. So we got to implement that. You got to get the machines tested. You got to get the machines certified, checked out, serviced. All these different things that keeps on happening that you have to maintain, to have the election everyone deserves.
So we're working on a series of stories that deals with the connection between poverty and lack of voter participation. And if you put a graph of socioeconomics over a graph of voter participation, it's almost the same exact thing. There's a direct correlation there. In your role, how do you approach trying to drive up that voter turnout, specifically in these neighborhoods?
Well, so first thing I did as commissioner was we established the Octavius Cotto Task Force. And that's a collaboration of nonpartisan profit organizations, faith-based organizations, and business leaders that actually have contacts with the community. And, through the task force, we had did over 1,000 community events. We may have questions, through the process. I mean, it's constant being inside of everyone's face. Because one thing I noticed when I first got elected was that a lot of the organizations weren't communicating. So the Committee of 70 wasn't working with the NAACP. The Urban League wasn't working on groups. I'm like, why we have all these different groups and nobody's working with each other? And so the 2020 election was sort of a great part for everyone to sing Kumbaya and work together. Because traditionally, the Committee of 70 was always against the commissioner's office. They, it was always a sort of, there was a lot of friction there before I got there. And the first thing I said was, oh no, wait a minute, we're going to work together and we're going to figure this out. And to their credit, because I was always looking at the Committee of 70 like, wait a minute, you don't come out of Center City. You just stay inside Center City. We're supposed to be, protecting voting rights for everybody in the city. And I challenged them on it. And, they said, okay, cool. They hired some different people that was in the community. So Committee 70 is more in the community, legal and voters. They're more in the community. And the meeting point is this Octavius Cotto Task Force that we put together. Again, it's the hospitals, it's the churches, it's the barbershop owners, hair salon owners, supermarkets, it's everybody. And we meet with different tasks that we're working on to build up that sort of awareness in the community. Now, it's a hard task because as talking to a lot of these voters inside these areas, they just say, hey man, I got other stuff in my mind other than voting. And you got to understand that. Or the other question could be, I never see elected officials other than election time. 2-3 weeks before election, they come around, want they vote, why should I vote for them? And then another reason why they say they don't vote is they don't know who to vote for. And so one of the strategies that we've seen from the campaigns and some of the incumbents was that they want to keep the voter turnout low so that they can get reelected. So you're not going to get too much buy-in from sitting elected officials really for increased voter turnout. That's one thing I learned in Senator Hughes' office when I established a nonprofit called Vote Philly Vote. I was trying to get funding for it, and all the elected officials was like, "Oh, you got to come with your own money or volunteers because we're basically not going to give it to you. Why would we give it to you?" And I was like, "Wow!" And so, again, we had to lean on different organizations that wanted to give resources about that had budgets that, that needed some different help to probably get inside the community. So again, we teamed up with Black Voters Matter, PAU Folk. I mean, there are so many different organizations. Right now we're at an all-time high of nonpartisan funding for elections. Again, people really didn't care about elections before the 2020 happened. So now there's a lot of different organizations when we all vote, Michelle Obama group. So there's different groups and organizations that are hearing what we've done. I mean, we actually applied for a grant to purchase all of our vote by mail equipment from the nonprofit in Chicago. So, it's those sort of collaborations and constantly talking to people over and over again. But again, that whole thing about, like I say, that's where people are at. And believe it or not, former President Trump drove voter turnout up. And one of the ways how he did it was that he had a commitment to social media. And a lot of policymakers still don't believe in the power of social media. I mean, President Biden invested more, but when he ran against Hillary Clinton, she outspent him, I think it was 3-1 on television, but he outspent her maybe 3-1 on social media. And that drove a lot of younger voters to vote because they're on social media. And a lot of disinformation, a lot of that stuff, it was all on social media. So this is a sophisticated campaign that they do, but they invest heavy on social media. So, I mean, that's another way how we have to sort of communicate with voters. We have to talk to a lot of the influencers and put those inside of our budget lines because, those are the people that may listen to these things, maybe on certain social media platforms that we need to take advantage of to communicate better with them.
All right, I'd like to bring in Denise Claymore here on Philadelphia.
Thanks, Larry, and thank you for joining us, Commissioner. I kind of want to piggyback on what you were talking about regarding social media. While social media is a good way to communicate with large groups of people, it is also a good way to totally misinform large groups of people. How do you combat that within what you're trying to do as a commissioner?
Well, sure. So one of the things that we did this election cycle, last election cycle, I believe we made a purchase of about $700,000 on was radio ads. WRD was partnering. We looked at this demographic, but the next level we want to try to do is get to that geofencing, and then have certain target messages for certain zip codes, because it's easier. Because if you take out a TV commercial, you might spend $1 million on all these commercials, but you got to be careful because you got to understand that, one, you're targeting the whole Delaware Valley area, so you may be missing certain people. So with those ads, you kind of can tailor it to each zip code, and it's basically me just talking to my colleagues, just giving them more research, more data, to saying, okay, this is the way how we have to get it done, but we have to do a better job at it. People like Wallow, Saudi Schuler, these sort of Wallow 267, Gilly the Kid, my colleagues might be looking like, I don't know about Wallow. But I'm like, Wallow 267, like that's who the people listen to, you know what I mean? So it's a sort of constant working together to see can we get it done on our level. But it's us working with them as well. We could definitely do a better job with that. But it costs money. These influencers now, maybe about 4 years ago, you probably could give a Wallow 267 $1,000 for a post. Now his price went up. So, I mean, you got to really make a serious commitment in your budget to say, okay, we want to really deal with influencers and not just giving them, money for a commercial, but really taking them in and say, okay, we really got to do these social media posts, man. Like we got to create a story. It's content. I mean, it's a lot of thought process that goes with that. So those are the things that I'm looking at. People like the Saudi Schulers of the world, we have to sort of do things in a different way than probably we have done in the past.
But how do you make sure that when you're working with these people that they're giving voters information that's factually correct?
So you got to monitor it. right? We got to make sure that we control, that we're really sitting down as to what the content needs to be. Because the other side that does disinformation, they're more coordinated than us. The election deniers, they're coordinated. One of the groups that has been targeted for disinformation, I said this on plenty of platforms, like I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm telling them, they're talking about disinformation. I said the number one group that has been targeted for disinformation is our returning citizens. You have millions of people around our country that don't believe that they have the right to vote, and they may have a criminal background, but they can vote. And what the other election denial side is doing is they're taking national stories and they're still doing geofencing to target other organizations. Like, what does that mean? Like what happened in Florida, I got so many constituents giving me calls when the constituents from Florida were arrested for voting from that voting task force. And it was people that had criminal records up here, Pennsylvania, scared to vote. And I'm like, you can vote. That happened in Florida. It didn't happen here. But if they're seeing that on their social media news feeds, which they pay money for to be on your social media feeds, these stories, it's going to affect you. And so that's when it comes to us to really put in that serious investment in that. You have to spend resources on it. I mean, I can get social media influence and all that, but the way how those algorithms work now, you have to sort of form a contract with somebody that does that for a living. And it has to be buy-in from my colleagues and other people that just really see that as a reasonable platform. Because again, it's like you talk about TV, radio ads, they kind of warm to that, but they're not hot on it. Because when I first got in, I was saying, look, we need buses done, we need everything. And they was just kind of like, hey, we got to do an election. They was like, no. And when I first got there, two colleagues, they were there, they served a lot longer than me. So it was Al Schmidt was there first. Both of them were like, nah, got it. We got it. What you talking about? Money for commercials. We got to do an election. I'm like, so I was like, we got to ask for more money. Being ambitious, because our budget was 10 million. Our budget up to like 35 million. I'm like, yeah, we got to keep on doing it. So it's going to call for us to maybe put together a coalition and a roundtable, so probably to do that, to show about the dangers of that, because I still don't think that we as Americans really understand how important social media is and how people get their content these days. They don't get it from the news no more. They get it from social media, whether it's true, whether it's not true. If it's someone that they trust, what they put on their social media, they typically will basically believe it. I mean, literally, they'll believe it.
Now it seems like you can get more people to turn out when there's a big ticket election coming up, like if it's president or governor or something like that. But sometimes when it's the mayor's race, the most important race that directly affects Philadelphians, mayor and council, you can't get people to come out. If it's the district attorney was reelected with 20% of the vote. How do we improve that? And it's particularly in places where there's a direct connection between you not getting the services you need and people knowing that they're going to get elected without your vote.
Well, so with the presidentials, right? They spend billions of dollars on it. So each election, right? You see TV commercials on all the time, radio commercials all the time. And even they purchasing social media ads and stuff like that as well. But then they're also doing events in the community. And so one of the things that I challenged a lot of the different elected officials, my colleagues, is doing events. We did over 1,000 community events. And that's having moon bounces on the community, food, meeting at social markets, supermarkets and things of this nature. It's constantly doing it, 12 months a year. But again, I don't get the same sort of response when it comes to presidential elections. They just don't. I mean, And the mayoral candidates, they don't spend that sort of money on it. That's just what it is. And I think we have to challenge, I think, the national parties to say, okay, why don't you spend more money on these off-year elections or someone that has an interest in it? But it's clear how much money they spend on the presidential races. They spend, again, billions of dollars. You can ask any radio executive, how's, things going on in the presidential races versus these? They don't spend. So we have to get the buy-in to actually sort of spend that sort of money. And again, Commissioner's office, we plan on spending about $750,000 in our next budget for that. Again, that's sort of brand new, but what I would like to see, if we could spend, if I could spend 1.5 million, I think that's a healthy start. But again, I think as a city with our big budget, why wouldn't we spend, $10 million, $15 million on the services that the cities have? Even a lot of people don't know about the sort of relief that you can get as property tax owners, just things that's happening from the city. A lot of our regular everyday constituents don't know what those things are that city government is doing. So I think we all can do a better job on that. But again, I think, you have to spend resources on it. That's just my sort of take on it.
Okay.
It has to be a line item budget for advertising.
Okay, well, thank you, Commissioner. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to send you back to Larry McGlynn, my co-host, and you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you very much, Commissioner Sabir. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, anytime. And you got some amazing information, so anytime. And thank you for allowing us to use this platform. Anything to get the sort of information out, it's consistency, whatever we can do, you can count me in, we're available. The more we vote, the more we get. This election up here, and Denise, we talked about just the mayoral race, but this is sort of unprecedented mayoral race because you have so many qualified individuals running for mayor, and you have unprecedented transition from council members. So you're going to have basically a brand new council. You're going to have 13 new judges on the Court of Common Pleas and Municipal Court, in addition to Supreme Court, Commonwealth Court, and Superior Court. So just that alone, the way our city is going to govern is going to be completely and totally different than the way we've seen maybe in the last 50 or 60 years. So I believe this race is going to be I believe it's the most important election. But again, talking to other people, they just don't know. So again, the people that do know, they have to reach out to their networks better. Because the first time that I voted, it was from my father, God rest his soul. He would call and reach out and make sure that everybody in the family would vote. And the committee person, judge of elections, would inform him of who voted house. He would let them know. And by the time that 9 o'clock call came, you wanted to be on the right side of that call. My father didn't ask for much, so he asked us to vote. I was like, okay, cool. I'm just going to vote because my dad told me to vote. Grandma or my aunt, right? And so we sort of had those experiences, right? And then as you get older, you have family. That's kind of the reason why. So we have to get back to that. And we used to see larger turnouts. And Wilson Good, senior, was running for mayor. We saw those sort of high numbers through the grassroots. So again, it can happen again, but I think the everyday person has to take that responsibility to do it. And again, a lot of younger voters, they don't know who to vote for. A lot of voters, they know it's election, but they say, I don't know who to vote for. Tell me to vote for. I vote for them, but I just didn't want to go vote for somebody that I didn't know. I'm like, okay, I don't necessarily agree with you, but you kind of do have a point. So I think the grassroots matter. I think we have to empower ourselves to get this done.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Commissioner.
Sure, anytime.